If you think the chaos of the 2020 contested election was bad, 2024 is going to be much, much worse. Picture this scenario. Votes are starting to pour in and the Democratic candidate is on track to win. Maybe even a landslide. Like 2020, Republican politicians say there's fraud. But this time, rather than the verification of the vote, something else happens. The Republican-led state legislatures meet, dismiss the popular vote in their states, and give their state's representatives to the Electoral College to their own handpicked slate. Sound ridiculous? Well, by 2024, the right-wing Supreme Court may rule that state legislatures have a constitutional right to seat the presidential electors of their choosing. Rather than stealing the election with a January 6th type insurrection, it could be stolen institutionally, allowing for a Republican candidate to be named the next president after losing the election. If this sounds like the end of democracy as we know it, however hollow that is, well, that's because it is. This is actually a strategy advocated by a shocking number of Republicans, and the case is already before the Supreme Court. Let me explain. So in October, the new Supreme Court started its term with the 6-3 right-wing supermajority. And as we've seen over the last few months, the Supreme Court's been on a rampage of conservative rulings, from ending the federally recognized right to abortion to massively reducing the EPA's purview over regulating clean water. Now, they've decided to hear arguments for this new case, which is called Moore v. Harper. Moore v. Harper started over a gerrymandering dispute in North Carolina, where the Republican state legislature challenged the ruling of the North Carolina Supreme Court that said that a new congressional map drawn by the state legislature was discriminatory and unfairly gave Republicans 11 safe districts, opposed to just 3 safe districts for Democrats. Well, the case begins with the immediate dispute about North Carolina. The arguments that the Republican leaders are making has massive implications for the whole electoral process. Their arguments rest on a few constitutional clauses, including one called the Presidential Electors Clause. The Presidential Electors Clause says the following: each state shall appoint, in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct, a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. The Republicans in the North Carolina case are basically arguing that this part right here, the legislature thereof, proves that the Constitution gives the state legislatures the supreme authority when it comes to setting the rules surrounding federal elections. This is true, they say, for congressional elections, but presidential elections as well. Their argument is that the state courts have no power to regulate the state legislature on the handling of these elections, not even the state constitution. According to them, the state legislature can act independently of any other state institution. This is what they're calling the independent state legislature theory, and there's a growing conservative movement to adopt it.
They keep saying theory because that's a meme they want out there, right? This is some theory of the Gorsuch, the Alito, these radicals on the right now, Trump appointees. This is a theory they've kind of cooked up. You're saying it's not a theory. Hey, it ain't a theory because it's black letter in the Constitution.
Yeah, it's the elections clause in the Constitution.
Now, if the Supreme Court accepts the logic of the independent state legislature theory, it'll basically make the popular vote in this country irrelevant. Here's how. So I'm sure many of you have heard at some point in your life someone say something along the lines of, in the United States, you don't actually vote directly for president, you vote for electors. And what these people are referring to is the Electoral College. So let's say I'm voting for president here in the state of New York, and I cast my vote for a Democratic candidate, and that candidate wins New York. What we've just done is elected a slate of electors chosen by the Democratic Party to represent the state of New York. So those electors then go to the Electoral College and represent the voters of New York and cast the ballot for the Democratic candidate. They cast their votes, their electoral votes, in the Electoral College for the Democratic candidate. Those votes are then taken to Congress, and Congress looks through the votes and says, okay, these results are legitimate, and they certify the election results. And only then is the president seated. Now, what does this have to do with independent state legislature theory? Well, think about what the Republicans in the Moore v. Harper case are saying. They are saying that state legislatures are completely independent when it comes to selecting presidential electors. In other words, they don't have to listen to anybody when it comes to seating the electors. That is their sole authority. No one can tell them what to do, including the voters. So what the ISLT says is that the Constitution says The state legislature is completely independent of all state institutions, and theoretically, this also allows them to ignore what the voters vote for. So you could have a situation where the voters, let's say, vote for a Democratic candidate, and the state legislature, which might be controlled by Republicans, say, oh, well, the vote was fraudulent, so we have to choose another set of electors. We have to choose the Republican, or we have to choose the party that came in second place. If you think back to January 6th, what we saw going on there was that the rioters were trying to intervene in this step of the process. They were trying to disrupt the congressional certification. So they were trying to rush into Congress and prevent Congress from basically giving their stamp of approval to the results of the Electoral College. If the Supreme Court adopts the independent state legislature theory, you don't have to stage a January 6th style insurrection, because you can immediately overturn the election results as soon as the popular votes are cast just by saying that the elections are fraudulent. So if this ruling goes in favor of independent state legislature theory, it would create a constitutional crisis that this country has never really seen. Now, why would Republicans want to do this? That much is clear. They're realizing that they can no longer win the popular vote, and they need other ways to contest elections. Republicans have only won the popular vote once in the last 30 years, and because of changing demographics, the Republican voter base is continuously shrinking. On the flip side, the number of Black and Latino voters and urban voters are increasing, and these demographics tend to lean Democrat. In 2020, Donald Trump received more votes than any other Republican candidate in history, yet he still lost the popular vote by 7 million votes. 5 key swing states that Trump won in 2016, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, and Wisconsin, all went to Biden in 2020. Some solidly red states could soon become swing states, including Texas, a state which will have 40 electoral votes in 2024. Republicans know that if things continue to go the way they are, they'll lose more and more elections. So their plan is basically to get ahead of that and abolish the one person, one vote principle and replace it with the rule of state legislatures. Republicans tend to dominate state legislatures, controlling them almost 2-to-1 over Democrats, so a Supreme Court ruling in favor of more would essentially put conservatives in the driver's seat. So will the Supreme Court actually side with the North Carolina Republicans and validate the independent state legislature theory? It's very possible. 4 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court have previously expressed sympathy for independent state legislature theory in some form. Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas have already offered opinions on this exact case in a previous consideration and said the Constitution gives the power to state legislatures in deciding how federal elections are conducted, and wrote that, quote, "We must take that language seriously." Brett Kavanaugh said he agreed in principle too. Notably, Kavanaugh, Roberts, and Amy Coney Barrett were all Republican lawyers for Bush during the 2000 Florida elections dispute. In the Bush v. Gore Supreme Court case, which decided that year's election, the Supreme Court stopped a recount ordered by the state Supreme Court and gave the state to Bush. While some of you might be saying the end of one person, one vote in majority rule sounds too crazy to be possible, think about all of the crazy and seemingly impossible things that have happened in the last 5 years. These politics have become completely mainstream in the Republican Party, almost a membership requirement, and they don't even try to hide this. In swing states in particular, Republican midterm candidates' main platform points include overturning the 2020 election results and overhauling the electoral systems of their respective states to ensure long-term Republican control. Take Mark Finchem, for example, who just won the Republican nomination in the Arizona Secretary of State primary. He basically ran on a platform of overturning elections. He supported ending early voting, getting rid of electronic voting machines, and co-sponsored a bill that, you guessed it, would give the Arizona state legislature the right to overturn elections. During a fundraiser, Finchem, a self-professed member of the right-wing militia the Oath Keepers, actually said that if he didn't win the Secretary of State race, that he simply wouldn't concede.
Ain't gonna be no consistent speech coming from this guy.
This is the guy running to control Arizona's elections. Carrie Lake, who just won the Arizona GOP primary for governor, said that if she lost the race, it would prove that there was, quote, cheating going on. Tudor Dixon, winner of the Michigan GOP primary for governor, claimed election fraud in 2020 was sloppy and obvious. John Gibbs, who beat the incumbent in the Republican primary for a Michigan congressional seat, encouraged his supporters to sign up to be poll watchers to overcome the cheating in his election, which hasn't even taken place yet. Tim Michels, who won the Republican primary for Michigan's governor's race, said that if he won, he didn't know if he would certify the 2024 presidential election results, which are 2 years away. Doug Mastriano, who just won the GOP nomination for Pennsylvania's governor's race, casually floated the idea on Steve Bannon's podcast that the Pennsylvania state legislature, which he was part of at the time, would be the ones to seat Pennsylvania's electors in the 2020 presidential race after Pennsylvania went to Joe Biden.
We're going to exercise our constitutional power here. So we're going to do a resolution between the House and Senate, hopefully today. I spent 2 hours online trying to coordinate this with my colleagues, and there's a lot of good people working this here. So the resolution is going to say we're going to take our power back. We're going to seat the electors. Now, obviously, we're going to need the support of the leadership in the House and Senate. We're getting there on that, but we need to act like.
Hold it. I think we got some breaking news here. You're saying you're going to get a joint resolution to actually go forward, and the Republicans control the House and the Senate, to go forward to basically take the power back from the Secretary of State and put it in the state legislature to put forward the electors?
That is exactly what we're going to do.
Overall, there are about 120 Republican midterm nominees that openly deny the 2020 election results in some form. So you can see the strategy beginning to take shape here. Any election that the Republicans can't win, they'll claim was fraudulent and overturn the results through the state legislatures. Moore v. Harper will give them the Supreme Court's legal blessing to do that. So this time around, they won't need to storm the Capitol because the deed will already have been done at the Electoral College with the appearance of legality. Also worth noting is that all of those candidates I just mentioned won their primaries in states that flipped from Trump to Biden in 2020. If they win, you can bet they're going to do everything in their power to make sure these states flip back like they've repeatedly promised to do. Regardless of who wins in 2024, it looks like the peaceful transfer of power is becoming history in US politics. Since January 6th, members of Congress have been alluding to civil war in response to so-called fraudulent elections.
Because, if our election systems continue to be rigged and continue to be stolen, then it's going to lead to one place, and it's bloodshed.
And surveys show that 40% of people believe it's somewhat likely that there will be a civil war in the next few years.
This is tyranny. When do we get to use the guns? No, and I'm not, that's not a joke. I'm not saying it like that. I mean, literally, where's the line? How many elections are they going to steal before we kill these people?
No.
The political right is right about one thing. The Constitution does not create a democratic system of government. In fact, the word democracy is not found a single time in the US Constitution. This is because the framers of the Constitution were the aristocrats of their time. They owned all the valuable land and resources, and they felt only other people of their class should have a say in politics. When the right wing talks about going back to the Constitution or this isn't a democracy, it's a constitutional republic, it's this founding vision, one where the vast majority of people have no say in their government that they want to go back to. If the Republicans go through with this, they will destroy whatever veneer of democracy is left in this country. Any illusion that people had any say in government will be shattered. The crisis that'll unfold will undoubtedly shake this country to its core and could transform it in profound ways. In 2020, we saw tens of millions of people take to the streets, face down tear gas and riot cops, and tear down Confederate monuments without hesitation. This time, faced with an outright stolen election, I don't think they're going to be going after statues, but the Supreme Court and the Electoral College itself.